I never imagined that the sharpest pain of my old age would not come from my body growing weaker, but from the voice of my own son echoing through the walls of my home. It was late afternoon, and I was resting in the living room, listening to the faint ticking of the clock, when his words suddenly cut through the air like glass shattering on the floor. I'm tired of taking care of her. The sentence wasn't whispered, it wasn't said in a moment of slip. It was deliberate, heavy, as if he wanted those words to be carried by the air and pierce through me. And they did. My heart froze. My breath became shallow. For a second, I wondered if I had heard it wrong. But the silence after his voice only confirmed the cruelty of what I had just heard. I sat still, gripping the arms of the chair, feeling the fabric beneath my fingers as though holding on to something tangible could keep me from crumbling inside. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest rose and fell unevenly, betraying the storm brewing within me. My eyes blurred with tears, not the kind that burst out with sound, but the silent kind, burning, resisting to fall, because even they were ashamed of existing. To think that after years of raising him, after nights awake at his bedside when he was sick, after meals shared at the table, after sacrifices that had carved deep lines into my life, my existence had been reduced to a burden, a weight, something he was tired of carrying. I could hear his footsteps moving across the hallway, unbothered, casual, as if those words carried no consequence. Perhaps, to him, they didn't. Perhaps, in his mind, he was simply speaking the truth he had carried in silence for too long. But to me, it was a truth I was never supposed to hear. And yet, now that I had, I could not unhear it. It played over and over in my mind, the same 5 words. Each repetition slicing deeper into me. I'm tired of taking care of her. I turned my head slightly, and in that fragile movement, I caught my reflection in the glass window. The woman staring back at me was not the young mother who once held her child's hand tightly as they crossed the street. Not the woman who worked extra shifts to buy him his first pair of good shoes. Not the mother who hid her own hunger so her child could eat. No, the reflection staring back at me was older, paler, wrinkled, and perhaps, to him, that was all I had become, an old woman in need of care, stripped of identity, stripped of worth, stripped of everything except my dependency. I wanted to call his name. I wanted to confront him, to ask how long he had carried this resentment, to demand to know if love had truly disappeared beneath the weight of responsibility. But my lips would not move. They trembled, useless, as if even they were afraid of giving sound to my breaking heart. My silence was deafening, but it was also my shield. Because in that moment, I understood something. Silence can be more powerful than words. Silence could be my weapon. He had no idea that in the quiet, behind my unmoving expression, I was already making a decision. I would not beg him for care, nor would I drown myself in the sorrow of his rejection. His words had burned me, yes, but they had also awakened something he could never expect, a strength he thought I had lost, because he thought his words would break me. But he had no idea what I was about to do. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that touch the soul and make us reflect about life. And now tell me, if it were you, how would you react if your own child said he was tired of taking care of you? Leave your comment below. Your words might inspire someone to rethink the way they treat the ones they love the most. My name is Judy. I am 80 years old, a widow, and above all else, a mother who once believed that love, sacrifice, and devotion would be enough to guarantee respect in old age. My husband has been gone for many years now. He left this world too soon, and since that day, I carried the weight of raising our only son alone. I was younger then, still strong, still holding on to the belief that no matter how difficult the journey, my sacrifices would one day be repaid with tenderness. I remember the days when money was scarce, and the nights when I sat by a lamp, mending his clothes so he could go to school without shame. There were winters when I ate less so he could have more on his plate. Summers when I worked 2 jobs, running myself to exhaustion just so he could have books, shoes, and opportunities I never knew as a child. Every wrinkle etched into my face is a testament to those years. Every gray strand of hair, a reminder of the battles I fought in silence. People say time steals beauty, but in truth, time gives you something more permanent. Scars of love, invisible medals earned through survival. When my husband died, I stood alone in a storm that could have destroyed me, but I looked at my little boy and told myself I had no choice but to endure. I told myself that he would one day see what I gave up, that he would one day hold me in the same regard I held him as a baby in my arms. I believed, with all my soul, that raising him with discipline, honesty, and affection would mold him into a man who would never abandon me. That belief gave me strength. That belief carried me through lonely nights when I wanted to collapse, through bills I didn't know how to pay, through fears that haunted me. I lived for him. Every decision I made, I measured against one question. Will this give him a better life? I denied myself dresses I wanted, vacations I dreamed of, simple comforts that other women my age enjoyed. I invested everything, my time, my youth, my strength, into the promise that when I was old and frail, I would not be alone. I thought he would stand by me, just as I once stood by him. That was the deal life seemed to offer. But life is rarely that fair, because the truth is, as the years passed, I began to notice subtle cracks in the bond I thought was unbreakable. The tone of his voice when I asked for help was sometimes laced with impatience. The way his eyes wandered when I tried to share stories from the past revealed a disinterest I could not ignore. At first, I excused it. He was tired, busy, under pressure. That's what I told myself. But deep inside, I felt the distance growing, a gap that widened with each year, until suddenly it was a canyon I could not cross. The irony is that while I thought I was raising him with unconditional love, I now wonder if he ever truly valued it. Did he ever understand the nights I sat awake by his side when fever burned his small body? Did he ever remember the way I shielded him from cruelty, sacrificing my pride so he would never feel less than others? Did he ever see me as more than a servant of his needs, more than the background character in his story of success? I thought he did. I thought my sacrifices were visible, undeniable, unforgettable. But maybe I was wrong. Now, as I sit here in the twilight of my years, hearing him say out loud that he is tired of taking care of me, I realize that my life was built on an illusion that if you give everything, you will receive love in return. That if you spend decades feeding someone's soul, they will, at the very least, honor yours. But perhaps I taught him only how to receive, and not how to give. Perhaps I mistook obligation for love. Perhaps the truth is simpler, and far more painful. He never valued it because he never believed he had to. Still, I refuse to let his indifference define me. I am Judy, the woman who raised a son from nothing, who carved a life out of struggle, who carried more than most people could bear and still stood tall. My identity is not erased by his lack of gratitude, but it is tested by it, tested in ways I never thought possible. And now, I can't help but ask myself, I ask you, too, if you were in my place, after a lifetime of sacrifices, how would you feel to hear that your child is tired of you? Would it crush you, or would it awaken something deeper inside? Tell me in the comments, do you believe love and gratitude from children should be unconditional, or do they fade when sacrifice is taken for granted? There is something cruel about realizing that the person you once held closest to your heart no longer looks at you the same way. My son, the very child, whose first steps I celebrated, whose first words I cherished, now moved around me as if I were nothing more than a responsibility to be managed. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe the weight of old age made me see shadows where there were none. But the truth revealed itself slowly, painfully, in the way he sighed when I called his name, in the impatience in his eyes when I asked for small favors, in the tone of his voice when he answered me, clipped and cold, as though each word cost him something. Care had become a transaction. He wasn't helping his mother anymore. He was fulfilling a duty, checking off a box on a list of obligations. And the saddest part was that he didn't even try to hide it. I could hear it in the way he shuffled through the house, his movements heavy, resentful. I could feel it in the silence that stretched between us, silence that once had been filled with laughter, with conversations that spilled late into the night, with warmth that made even the smallest home feel like the grandest palace. Now, every sound seemed to carry distance. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen didn't invite me anymore. The sound of the television in the living room was not meant to be shared. Even his footsteps in the hallway, once a comfort, now sounded like chains dragging, weighted down by a burden he no longer wanted to bear. And then there were the words that seared me like open flames. I'm tired of taking care of her. I can't erase them. They cling to my skin. They haunt my dreams. Those words became the lens through which I saw everything he did. Every glance, every sigh, every moment of his detachment now screamed what he had confessed. He was tired of me. It wasn't my age he was tired of. It wasn't the chores, the responsibilities, the interruptions to his life. No, it was me, the very essence of who I am, the person who had given him life, who had poured herself into his existence, who had fought storms he never even knew raged around him. To him, I had become the problem, the weight, the inconvenience. And so, I learned what loneliness truly feels like, not the loneliness of being alone in a room, but the loneliness of sitting across from someone you love, knowing that their heart has already left you. That is a wound deeper than any silence, sharper than any rejection, because the person is still there, but their love is not. They look at you, but they do not see you. They speak to you, but they do not hear you. They live with you, but you are not living with them. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I let my mind wander back to when things were different. I remember the boy who used to run into my arms after school, his small hands clutching drawings he had made for me. I remember the teenager who nervously asked me for advice before his first date, pretending to be embarrassed but secretly hanging on to every word. I remember the young man who hugged me tightly before leaving for his first job, promising he would always take care of me. Those memories are like faded photographs, delicate and fragile, their colors washed away by time, but their meaning still as sharp as ever. They remind me of what once was, and they torment me with what is no longer. I often wonder where that boy went, the boy who believed I was his world, the boy who thought I could do no wrong, the boy who once looked at me with eyes that carried love, not exhaustion. I know he is still, inside him somewhere, buried beneath the man who has grown resentful, beneath the son who now sees me as a burden. But finding that boy again feels impossible. It is as if a door has closed, and I have been locked on the other side, left to knock against wood that will never open again. The house feels bigger now, not because it has grown, but because the distance between us has. Each room echoes with the absence of connection, with the ghost of laughter that once lived here. The walls still hold the pictures of our family, smiling faces captured in moments that feel like they belong to strangers now. I look at them often, trying to reconcile the man who walks past me without care and the boy who once clung to my hand like I was his lifeline. Perhaps the cruelest truth is that love cannot be forced. I cannot demand gratitude. I cannot beg for tenderness. What once was freely given now feels withheld, as though my very existence drains him of something vital. And that is what shatters me most, not the labor of care, not the chores he performs, but the absence of love in the doing. Because love makes burdens light, but without love, even the smallest act becomes a heavy chain. I sit in my chair sometimes and whisper to myself, trying to remind my heart that I am not worthless, that I am more than what he makes me feel. But the doubt creeps in, slowly, dangerously. What if I am wrong? What if, in his eyes, I truly have become nothing but weight? Tell me in the comments, do you believe children owe their parents gratitude for sacrifices made, or does love fade when it turns into duty? Your answer may change how someone sees their own family tonight. There are truths that weigh heavier than silence, truths you carry alone because you fear what they could reveal about the people you love most. For years, I carried one such truth in the depths of my heart, hidden even from the son I once believed would stand by me through every season of life. While he walked through this house believing he was the one carrying me, I knew a reality he could never have imagined. I was not helpless, I was not empty-handed, and I was not dependent in the way he thought. Because long ago, I made a decision to save, to sacrifice, to protect a future that no one else knew existed. When my husband was alive, he and I had little more than dreams. We worked endlessly, through long nights and weary mornings, scrubbing floors, taking odd jobs, saving every penny as though it were a treasure. We never lived lavishly, not because we didn't want to, but because we believed that tomorrow deserved more security than today's fleeting pleasures. Every coin I tucked away in the corners of my savings felt like a shield against despair, a quiet promise to myself that no matter what storms came, I would not drown. And so, without telling anyone, not even my son and I, built something. Not a palace, not an empire, but a quiet fortune, a small nest egg that grew with every sacrifice I made. It was the shoes I didn't buy, the dresses I never wore, the vacations I refused to take. It was the hours I worked when my body ached, the jobs I accepted when dignity told me to rest. All of it, carefully folded into accounts he never knew about, investments he never imagined I was wise enough to make. By the time I reached the later years of my life, what I held in silence was no longer small. It was powerful. It was life-changing, and it was mine. I never told him, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted something more than trust. He wanted truth. I wanted to know whether the love he gave me was born of his heart, or whether it would vanish the moment money entered the room. Because money, as I have seen too often, has the power to reveal the soul of a person. It strips away the masks, it lays bare the intentions. And I, a mother who had given everything, wanted to know if what I received in return was pure. So, I stayed silent, even when times grew hard, even when he struggled, even when I had the means to ease his burdens with a single word. I held back, not because I wished him pain, but because I wished for clarity. If my son's devotion was tied to the weight of a bank account, then it was never devotion at all. The cruel irony is that his words, the cold declaration that he was tired of caring for me, were the very answer I had feared. In that moment, I knew that my silence had uncovered a truth no mother wants to face. His love was not unconditional. His care was not born of gratitude. He looked at me not as the woman who built his world, but as a liability, a chain tied around his future. And yet, he had no idea that the chain was never mine to give. Because, while he believed he carried me, it was I who carried him. Quietly, secretly, with the power of a fortune he had never earned. And the thought tore me apart. What would he have done if he had known? Would he have treated me with tenderness then? Would his patience have lasted longer, his words softened, his sighs silenced? Or would the mask have slipped entirely, showing me a hunger for inheritance instead of love? That is the torment of silence. You create questions that no answer can soothe. And yet, I knew that my silence was necessary. Because the moment he said he was tired of me, I understood exactly why I had kept it hidden. His heart had already failed the test, even without money on the table. He had shown me the truth of his love. It was conditional, fragile, brittle as glass, shattering the moment the weight of responsibility pressed down. There is a strange kind of power in knowing something others don't. He moved around me like a man in control, like a man who held my fate in his hands, when in reality, the opposite was true. At any moment, I could have shattered his illusion with a single sentence. I am not the burden you think I am. I am the blessing you failed to see. But I kept that sentence buried in my chest, because I wanted him to live in the truth of his own choices. And so I watched, I listened, I endured, knowing that every careless word, every impatient gesture, every sigh of exhaustion was another nail in the coffin of the son I once knew. He thought he was teaching me that I was a weight in his life, but I was learning something far more valuable. I was learning who he truly was without the promise of reward. And when the day came that the truth would be revealed, it would not be me who stood in shame. Because you see, I didn't hide my fortune out of fear. I hid it out of hope. Hope that love could still exist without the shadow of wealth looming over it. Hope that my son would prove himself capable of cherishing me simply because I was his mother. That hope died the moment he confessed his exhaustion. And yet, my silence still held power, because he had no idea what I was about to do next. Tell me in the comments, do you think true love can survive when money is involved? Or does wealth always change the way people show their hearts? The silence had been my armor for decades, but there comes a moment in every life when silence becomes betrayal, not of others, but of yourself. That moment arrived for me on a quiet afternoon, when his impatience turned into cruelty, when his words sharpened into knives. I realized that if I kept holding my truth, it would no longer protect me. It would only bury me. So I decided that the time for revelation had come. I waited for him at the table, the same table where I had once served his favorite meals, the same table where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays, with nothing more than hope and laughter to fill the room. He entered, distracted, his phone in hand, speaking carelessly to someone else. His tone filled with that same sigh of exhaustion that had become his anthem. He looked at me as though I were already invisible. And in that moment, I knew I had to speak. "Sit," I told him, my voice calm but steady. He hesitated, confused by the authority in my tone. For years, I had allowed him to believe he was the one in control, that I was the fragile one, dependent on his mercy. But now, there was steel in my words, a quiet fire that startled him enough to obey. He sat down, placing his phone aside, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I looked at him, really looked at him, the way only a mother can. I saw not just the man he had become, but the boy I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had wiped away, whose dreams I had fueled with sacrifices he would never comprehend. And I asked myself, where had that boy gone? What had twisted his heart into this hardness? Then, slowly, I began to speak. "I have listened to you sigh about me," I said softly. "I have heard you say that you are tired of taking care of me. But what you don't know, my son, is that all this time, it was never you who carried me. It was I who carried you." He frowned, confused, perhaps even offended, but I did not stop. "I worked when you were young. I labored when others rested. I saved when others spent. I built a safety net for you, for me, for our future. And all these years, I kept it silent. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to know if your love was real. I wanted to see if you would care for me as your mother, or only as a key to something more." He laughed then, a nervous, sharp laugh, as though my words were nothing more than an exaggeration. But I had prepared for this moment. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the folder that had waited there, untouched, for years. Bank statements, investment documents, proof of everything I had built in silence. His eyes widened as the numbers leaped from the page. "This," I whispered, my voice breaking, "is the truth I kept from you. This is what you never knew. And now, I must decide who deserves it." For the first time in years, his confidence shattered. His face drained of color, his breath caught in his throat. The man who had sighed with impatience, who had spoken of me as a burden, now stared at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. Because, in that moment, he understood the weight of his mistake. He had not just dismissed an old woman. He had dismissed the very foundation of his future. I could see the storm in his eyes. Regret, anger, panic. He stammered, reaching for excuses, for words that might erase what he had said before. But words cannot be unsaid, and love cannot be repaired once it has been tested and found wanting. "I wanted to give this to you," I continued, tears welling in my eyes. "I wanted to leave you with the fruits of my labor, the proof of my sacrifices. But now I wonder if you ever deserved it at all." He tried to protest, but his voice was drowned by my own. "Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you grew tired of me. It's that you believed I had nothing left to give, that I was empty, that I was just waiting for the end. But I am not empty, I am not powerless. And now I must choose who will inherit not just my fortune, but my legacy." I watched him crumble before me, and for the first time in years, I felt the power shift. No longer was I the fragile figure in the corner, waiting for his patience. No, I was the architect of a truth that could redefine everything. The silence that followed was thick, unbearable. He sat there, hands trembling, his eyes fixed on the documents that had betrayed his illusion. He looked at me, as though seeing me for the first time not as a burden, but as a force, as a woman who had endured, who had built, who had tested, and who now held the power to decide. And yet, I did not reveal everything, not yet, because there was one more choice I had made, one more revelation that would cut deeper than the first. He thought the numbers on those papers were the end of the story. He had no idea they were only the beginning. Now I want to hear from you. If you had to choose between rewarding someone who betrayed you or giving everything to someone who truly valued you, what would you do? The weight of silence had lifted when I revealed the truth of what I had built. But now came the heavier burden, the choice of what to do with it. My son sat across from me, his face pale, his eyes darting between the papers and my expression, searching for mercy. He wanted to believe that all was forgiven simply because he now knew there was something at stake, something tangible that could secure his future. But I had lived long enough to understand that money does not change, hearts it only exposes them. For years, I had told myself that love was unconditional, that a mother's heart never wavered, no matter how many disappointments it endured. I had forgiven him for his sharp words, his neglect, his careless sighs. But what haunted me most was not what he said aloud, but what his actions had whispered for years, that I was a burden, that my value had expired with my youth, that my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. And so, as I looked at him trembling in that chair, I realized the decision had already been made in my heart long ago. I thought of her, my granddaughter, the light in her eyes when she visited, the way she listened, really listened, when I spoke of the past. She was young, but she carried something her father never had: gratitude. She would sit with me at the kitchen table, asking about her grandfather, about how we built this home, about the nights we went to bed hungry but never hopeless. She absorbed every story as though it were treasure. And perhaps she understood something her father never did, that love is the only true inheritance worth protecting. The contrast between them was blinding. My son, impatient, entitled, waiting for me to vanish so that life could be more convenient for him. My granddaughter, kind, curious, leaning into my stories not because she wanted anything in return, but because she valued what they represented. I turned my eyes back to him, and I saw the fear there. Not fear of losing Mino, that had never been his concern. It was fear of losing what he thought he deserved, of being left with nothing after years of assuming everything was his by default. Do you know what I realized? I said, my voice steady, my gaze piercing into him. I realized that inheritance is not about blood. It is not about who shares my name. It is about who shares my values, who honors my sacrifices, who carries forward the love I poured into this family. His lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. He knew, deep down, he knew what was coming. I had a choice, I continued, to give everything to you, as I once planned, to hand over the results of a lifetime of sacrifice to a man who sighed at the weight of caring for the very woman who gave him life. But why would I do that? Why would I reward neglect when I have seen with my own eyes the love that your daughter has shown me? He flinched at her mention, his pride wounded. For years, he had believed himself the center of my world, the inevitable heir to everything I had. But now he realized that love could skip a generation, that legacy could bypass him entirely. I am leaving it to her, I declared, my words slicing through the silence like a blade. Every penny, every brick, every piece of the life I built, it will be hers, not because she asked, not because she expected, but because she earned it with her kindness, her respect, and her love. The shock in his face was almost unbearable to watch. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and yet there was nothing he could do. He could not argue his way out of the truth. He had shown me who he was, and I had finally accepted it. He tried, of course. He begged. He promised change. He swore that his words had been a mistake, that his heart had always been in the right place. But promises spoken under threat are not promises at all. They are desperation, and I would not let desperation rewrite the years of indifference I had endured. As he crumbled before me, I felt something unexpected: peace. For the first time in so long, I was no longer waiting for his love. I was no longer yearning for his approval. I had freed myself from the illusion that motherhood meant endless forgiveness, endless sacrifice without recognition. I had reclaimed my dignity by choosing to honor the one person who had truly seen me not as a burden, but as a woman whose life mattered. And so, I signed the papers. The ink flowed across the page like a final act of defiance, a quiet revolution written in black and white. The fortune was no longer in limbo. It had a name, a future, a purpose, and it was no longer his. He sat there in silence, staring at the documents as though they were a death sentence. Perhaps, in a way, they were. Not the end of his life, but the end of the illusion that he could treat me as disposable and still inherit the rewards of my labor. I stood, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of liberation. For the first time, the power was mine. Now tell me, if you were in my place, would you still reward the child who hurt you? Or would you choose to give everything to the one who truly valued you? There comes a moment in every life when silence no longer protects you, when years of swallowing pain finally turn into words that demand to be spoken. For me, that moment came not in anger, but in clarity. The years had shaped me into a woman who understood what true wealth was. It was not in the money I had hidden, not in the bricks of the home I had built, but in the way love had been given and received. As I sat alone, after making my decision, the house felt different, the walls that once echoed with my son's laughter, the rooms where I watched him take his first steps, now seemed like shadows of a story that had drifted too far from its original script. He had grown, but he had not grown wiser. He had aged, but he had not matured. And while the world told me to forgive endlessly because that's what mothers do, I finally realized that forgiveness without accountability is nothing more than permission to be hurt again. I remembered my husband's words from long ago, spoken during one of the hardest winters of our lives. We had little money, barely enough food, and the roof leaked with every storm. I cried, wondering how we would survive, and he looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Wealth isn't what you own, it's who you raise." Those words had carried me for decades, and now, at this late stage in my life, I saw their meaning more clearly than ever. I had raised a son who had lost sight of the gift of family, but I had also watched a granddaughter bloom into a woman who understood it. The torch of love, it seemed, had not been extinguished. It had simply passed over one heart and landed in another, and that was enough for me. The truth that stung me most was not that my son had grown cold, but that I had spent so many years hoping he would warm again. I waited for apologies that never came, for gratitude that never arrived, for love that always felt conditional. I thought it was my duty as a mother to accept less, to shrink myself so that he could grow. But what I had learned, what I wanted the world to hear, was that even mothers deserve to be valued, respected, and cherished. I was not a burden. I was not disposable. I was the reason he had a roof, a name, a chance at life. Yet he chose to sigh at my presence, as though I were a weight dragging him down, instead of the anchor that once kept him steady. That choice revealed more about him than about me. And so I stopped waiting. I stopped begging for love in a place where it no longer lived. What I gave to my granddaughter was not just money. It was a lesson, a legacy, a reminder that love must never be taken for granted. I wanted her to understand that strength is not in pretending you are fine when you are not, but in standing up and declaring your worth, even when others try to silence it. My son thought he had me cornered with his words, that by making me feel unwanted, he could control the way I lived the rest of my life. But the truth is, he gave me freedom. By showing me who he truly was, he released me from the chains of false hope. I no longer had to wonder if he loved me, had my answer. And with that answer, I chose peace. The final lesson was simple but powerful. Love cannot be demanded, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be faked. It reveals itself in the smallest actions, in who sits with you when you are tired, who listens when you speak, who remembers your sacrifices without needing to be reminded. Those are the people worthy of your legacy, your blessings, your trust. I thought of the countless parents, the countless elders, who sit in silence today, afraid to speak, afraid to admit that they feel forgotten by their own children. I thought of the mothers who keep giving, and still hear that they are too much, too needy, too inconvenient. To them, I wanted my story to speak loudly. You are not a burden. You are the foundation. And if someone cannot see your worth, it does not erase, it only exposes their blindness. As the sun set outside my window, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that my story was not just about betrayal. It was about awakening. I had not lost a son that I had found myself again. I had reclaimed the dignity that motherhood had asked me to sacrifice for too long. And in choosing where my love and legacy would go, I had ensured that the values I held dear would not die with me, but would continue in the hands of someone who truly deserved them. And so, with that clarity, I closed my eyes and whispered the words I wished every forgotten parent could say aloud. I am not too much. I am enough, and I will never be erased. Now tell me, if you had the power to decide who carries your legacy, would you give it to the one who hurt you, or to the one who truly honored you? There comes a point in life when you finally understand that everything you went through, even the pain, had a purpose. As I stood in the silence of my room, after all the storms of betrayal and disappointment, I realized that God had not abandoned me, nor had He turned His face away. No, He had simply given me a different kind of gift, the gift of clarity, the strength to see what was real and what was not. I had spent years believing that love was something I had to beg for, something I had to prove myself worthy of, especially from the very person I had given my body, my soul, my sacrifices to raise. But as I reflected, I saw the truth. A parent's worth is not measured by a child's gratitude. It is measured by the life they lived, by the lessons they planted, by the faith they held on to when the world tried to break them. And so I refused to let bitterness consume me. I refused to let rejection define me. Instead, I chose to hold on to the values that shaped me: faith, resilience, and the knowledge that God sees everything, even the tears no one else notices. I realized that maybe my son had closed his heart, but that did not mean mine had to close as well. My heart still had the capacity to love, to give, to trust again, but only to those who truly honored it. I remembered the words of Scripture: honor your father and your mother. How many have forgotten this? How many treat their parents as burdens instead of blessings? And yet, God sees. He knows the truth behind closed doors. He knows who stands by the weak and who abandons them. He knows who deserves the blessing of legacy and who does not. This is why I chose to give my treasure, my legacy, to the granddaughter who stood by me not because of money, not because of expectation, but because she loved me as I was, purely, sincerely. And that is what true wealth is: being loved without conditions. Reaching this age, after everything, I see now that life is not about what you lose, but about what you still have. It is not about the doors that close, but about the windows that open when you least expect them. My son thought his harsh words would silence me, that his rejection would crush me, but instead, they awakened a fire I thought I had lost. I stood taller, even in my frailty, because I remembered who I was: a woman of strength, a mother of resilience, a soul that no one could erase. And that is the message I want every person listening to carry with them. You are not defined by the ones who failed to see your worth. You are defined by the Creator who made you, by the journey that shaped you, and by the courage you show when you refuse to be broken. So to every mother, every father, every elder who feels invisible, hear me now. Your life still matters. Your story still matters. Your love still matters. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. If they treat you like a burden, remember it is not because you are too heavy. It is because their hands are too weak to hold what is sacred. And when I think of what lies ahead, I smile with peace. Because I know my story doesn't end with rejection, it ends with victory. Not the kind of victory the world measures in wealth or power, but the victory of dignity, of faith, of choosing love over bitterness. My son may have thought he silenced me, but in truth, my voice is louder than ever, carried into the hearts of those who listen and understand. This is the final gift I leave behind: not just money, not just possessions, but a living testimony that even in betrayal, you can find strength. Even in abandonment, you can find purpose. And even in silence, you can find a voice that will echo for generations to come. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so more people can hear stories that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and faith. And stay tuned, because in the next video, I will share a story, even more powerful one, where a grandmother, thought to be powerless, turned the tables in a way no one expected. You won't want to miss it.